The nonprofit MBA purpose is to provide new business insights and fresh creative ideas for executive directors and their teams that will help them improve their organization. Here is your host, Stephen Halasnik.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Halasnik. I will be your host for today's Nonprofit MBA podcast. I am co-founder of Financing Solutions, and we, for those of you who don't know about us, for the last 12 years have been the leading provider in the United States of lines of credit for small nonprofits. And yes, there is a company that provides lines of credit to nonprofits. It's been so hard in the past for nonprofits to get any type of financing, and having a nonprofit to manage uneven cash flow is just, really, really helpful. And we have a sponsor for today's podcast. It's Araize, Araize. Araize Fast Fund Online is a cloud-based accounting system that seamlessly integrates nonprofit fund accounting, fundraising, and payroll in a single solution. They're actually designed by CPAs for nonprofits, which I'm a big believer on, of having something that's specifically built for your industry. It's better to use that than to use something like QuickBooks and try to make it work. So if you are interested, please visit their website at araize.com, araize.com, or call 866-840-7449 and ask for Joe. One of the nonprofits that I'm on the board on, we switched to Araize. So I'm not just someone who's just doing an advertisement about them. We actually did switch them. We're really happy with them. They've been great. Today, I am very excited to be speaking with Cindy Wagman from the Good Partnership. And today we're going to be talking about how nonprofits can leverage fractional executives to level up. I think this is a great topic. I was excited when I saw this on my agenda for today. Cindy Wagman is the president and founder of the Good Partnership, a values-driven, social justice-informed consultancy that is the home of the fractional fundraising movement that connects small nonprofits and the fractional fundraisers that serve them. So, Cindy, welcome to today's Nonprofit MBA podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So when we say fractional fundraising, what does that mean?
Yeah, so fractional executives is this term that exists outside of the not-for-profit space. And the idea is that for I learned about it as a small business, but it's smaller businesses, smaller nonprofits that don't necessarily have the budget or capacity to bring in a C-suite level, marketer, finance person, fundraiser, what have you, but we still want someone in the role who's not just doing the work, but providing the strategy. And so this movement of fractional executives has been growing that allows small businesses and nonprofits to access that high level of support at a fraction of the price. And so with fundraising in particular, you're getting someone with 10, 15 plus years experience who comes in, they work with you, you get a fraction of their time. It's a fraction of what you would typically pay them. And they're going to, in a very unique consulting relationship, straddle the high-level strategic direction with the day-to-day implementation. And so it really gives you a mini department to do the work.
Yeah, I have a lot of experience with this too. 15 years ago, I brought on a part-time CFO to help us get, for one of my companies, to help us work with the banks, our banks, to get us a line of credit because we were growing so fast. This is not with Financing Solutions, with another company I had. And there's been other occasions. I mean, I do a lot. There's we're talking about C-level people, but this is really common now. I mean, just to give you an idea, when we write this podcast up into a full article, I use someone from Nigeria to do it. Yeah. Right. And you could say, if you have some, listen, you got to realize the world is a global economy right now. And if you have some issues with, jobs going overseas, and that's different. It's still fractional work, right? What you have to understand is, I don't even know if I would be able to do it financially if I kept it in the United States, so, it's worth me to send it overseas to get done and get the job done. And if I kept it here, I wouldn't. But, that's kind of a little different than today's topic. I know we're talking to a lot of smaller nonprofit executive directors in this podcast, and board directors too. What is the stumbling block that small nonprofit executive directors have about using fractional leadership?
Yeah. Okay. So I want to, because I know you mentioned that it's a little different than, hiring someone overseas. And I just want to get really clear on the difference before I answer your question.
Please.
So I have a virtual assistant who's based in the Philippines. She's amazing. And she's really great at small day-to-day tasks, but requires, like, she doesn't have the experience in my sector and in the business for me to be able to hand off what I would call the emotional load of the work, which is the high-level strategic piece, which is what fractional executives do, unique from just outsourcing work, is that now I'm working with a fractional marketer in my business. And with him, I expect him to come to me with the strategy instead of me coming up with the strategy and outsourcing it to someone else. And I think that which relates back to your question about the stumbling blocks. I think that there's a couple big ones. One is, we don't know this exists. It is still relatively new out in the world. And so people are probably just learning about it for the first time now, listening to you and I. So that's one big one, is that it's new. And part of that as well is we are naturally skeptical about new things, and especially in our sector, we are very reluctant to adopt new things. Change is hard for people. It's even harder for small nonprofits. And then the third big one, this is a big one, is that we're really bad at delegating. And I think that especially in smaller organizations where we're used to doing things our way and burning ourselves out in the process, but it's hard for us to be able to trust someone to do things either the way we would do it or better. And what I've seen fractional executives replace is often sort of that junior full-time staff person. And we're used to, with that junior full-time staff person, having to manage them a lot. Right? Like, it requires more. And I've heard executive directors say, well, I'm just not going to hire because in theory it should be easy. It should take work off my plate, but it actually adds work. And so I think we have gotten ourselves into the habit of just saying, well, I'll just do it myself. It's faster, it's easier, because our budgets are limited. Usually the people we have to delegate to don't have the experience that we need them to have to be able to effectively delegate that emotional labor. And that's what I think we associate with. And that's why fractional executives is a really good opportunity, because you're getting someone who can step in at that high level too and actually take the stress off your plate.
Yeah, I'm going to add my 2 cents too from my observation, and that is, it's a culture that small nonprofits have of I'll use this word, being cheap. They always think, oh, if I spend money here, it takes away from my cause. And so they're so used to the idea that they have to do everything cheap, right?
Yeah.
And that means doing it themselves, doing it with volunteers, doing it. And I would challenge everybody who's listening that you have to get out of thinking that way.
Absolutely.
And like, so much so, this is the other part about this. What I've heard on a lot of my podcasts from great guests is how nonprofits do not raise enough money for internal costs.
Yeah.
I forget what's the name of the
like overhead or
I can't think of the right
operations.
Yeah, I can't think of the correct term, but I'll think of it in a second. But what I would have done if I ran a nonprofit, I know I'm on a board of a nonprofit, but if I it's a dicey situation, that nonprofit I'm involved with. It's not worth explaining it, but I would go to one of my better donors,
Mhm.
or go find a really good donor and say to them, I need to bring on this part-time executive,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
going to cost us. Would you pay for that for me?
Yeah.
Because I'm going to tell you right now, anyone who's involved with your cause, a lot of them are business people,
Mhm.
and they get it.
They get it.
They
And what
get
I
it.
love about this proposition is that it's not actually more expensive than hiring a full-time junior person. And so you probably have the budget. If you're an organization that's starting to think about hiring for help around these areas, whether it's your marketing or your financing or finances or HR or fundraising, chances are you are starting to think about, okay, I need help in this area. Maybe we need to hire someone. But again, it's that cheap, like we just need to get the minimal, like the cheapest option. And so you probably have some budget. It's just looking at how to step outside of this idea of like, what are you actually paying for? And how do I optimize my budget with more innovative ways to work with people? And so the fractional fundraisers that I work with, and I have a network of almost 30 of them, if you hired one of them to work in your organization, it's probably going to be fairly comparable depending on where you are and all, a number of factors, but pretty comparable cost to hiring a full-time person who's kind of right out of school and who again adds more work to your plate instead of takes it away. So the interesting solution around fractional executives is that it's an investment. I 100% agree. You need to invest in your growth, but it's a smart investment and it's really optimizing. Like, I'm not asking you to come up with $150,000 to hire a C-suite person. You can get someone for around 50 or really a fraction, right? So it's
And
really,
that's if it's full-time job. I mean, I'm sorry, correction. That's if it's a year assignment.
right.
A lot of these consultants, let's call them,
Mhm.
consultants, they come on, they might only have a 3-month gig.
Yeah. And you get to, and it depends a little bit on the nature of the work. So when I hired my fractional marketer, we started with a 3-month contract. But when I encourage organizations to work with a fractional fundraiser, I would start with 12 months because with some investments, you need time for it to pay off.
Yeah.
And that is with fundraising in particular, you really need at least 12 months to start to see things take off. And fundraising, there are other things. I actually think marketing is similar, but the benefit that you derive from these functions is around consistency. It's doing the work consistently over time. There are one-off projects. There are definitely things like I work with coaches and other consultants for projects, but with certain things in your organization, the magic, the payoff is that you are focused, you're getting the implementation, the day-to-day work done consistently over a long period of time. As soon as you sort of stop, you lose the momentum. My friend Mike Dirksen talks about the flywheel of fundraising, and it's sort of like you build the momentum so that it keeps going and requires less work. But you have to get to that point where you have the consistent momentum. So it depends on the function that you're hiring for. I know for me, I have this fractional finance person in my business who does all the bookkeeping and high level finance strategy. Like, we've been working together probably for 5 years, maybe 6, and I don't think about it at all anymore because the benefit to me is increased over time the longer I've worked with her.
Yeah, I think that often smaller nonprofits too, you have to challenge yourself to grow, and as a leader, as a manager, and part of that is understanding the pieces that you need to
Mhm.
accelerate growth,
Yeah.
right? And you you have to grow as an executive director, and part of that growth is understanding the people you need to reach bigger ambitions,
Mhm.
because you may not get there yourself.
You probably won't get there
Right.
yourself, and you're probably going to burn out in the process if you're not already
Yes.
burnt out.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that we do need those investments, and having someone at that high level strategic space actually gives you your time back, because there's the growth of your organization, which requires people. You need human capital. But then there's also the growth of you as a leader. And none of us can grow when we're in survival mode. And most executive directors are in survival mode because they're constantly doing the work of 10 people and they just don't have the help. And then they're bad at delegating. And it becomes this spiral where we get stuck and our mission gets stunted. And that's why investing in other people so that you can invest in yourself as a leader as well they kind of go hand in hand, and will, I think, and this is why I'm such a huge fan of this model, is it will help level up your organization in a speedy way that just hasn't existed before this kind of help was there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in this, and I believe that, um, and I practice what I preach. Okay, I've built 7 companies over 25 years, and they're bigger companies, and not enough people, regardless if they're executive directors or business owners, strategize enough. They don't
Yeah.
do it on a weekly basis. They don't do it on a monthly basis. They don't do it on a quarterly basis. They don't do it on a yearly basis. And so if your nonprofit right now is $500,000 in yearly revenue, you need to sit down and say, how do I get to 5 million?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
You need to say that. And then you need to figure out how you're going to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm just picking a number, but that 3 to
Yeah.
5 million is really,
Yeah.
where
What
you
does
can.
the next level look like?
Right.
And also, one of my favorite questions to ask is, don't make decisions today as the organization you were, but what are the decisions you need to make as if you were that 5 million
Yes, I
organization, right?
agree.
We are so stuck in the mindset of the past that we behave, and this is not like, if you look at the neural pathways in our brain, like, our behavior is repetitive. We do what we've done in the past. And so we have to break out of that habit and routine and actually think about, okay, I'm going to put on my hat. We're a $5 million organization. What decision would I make around whatever decisions I'm making during that day as that organization? Because that is the only way I'm going to get to the 5 million. I have to make decisions aligned with that.
Yeah, and like, just to give you an idea, I typically almost every Friday after lunch would go to a coffee shop and look at my strategic plan. Okay.
Mhm.
Now I only kept my strategic plan I only have a 1-page strategic plan. Okay. I only limit it to 1 page. And even if you spend 15 minutes, 20 minutes every week looking at it, you're thinking of what you are saying is that we're thinking about the past. This forces you to move into the future. And one of the most important things going from $500,000 in yearly revenue, regardless of what it is, to 5 million, is you have to start envisioning what it's like. You have to be out of doing all the things that you are doing now, which is
Yeah.
the dishwasher. You're doing everything. And
Yeah.
who doesn't want to get out of that anyway? Honestly,
No one likes it. I
no.
mean, we get used to it and we think it's the only way, but it's not serving you and it's not serving your mission. And in
Yes.
fact, it's probably harming both.
And then
And yeah.
on that note, I think one of the most important fractional consultants you should bring on is a coach.
Yeah.
It's the most important person first,
Yeah.
and that's somebody who has prior experience in building a nonprofit,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And Because then they'll understand the concept of fractional,
Hmm.
consultants as well, and they'll be
Yeah.
able to put the pieces together.
Yeah.
Uh,
And it sort of circles right back to some of the stuff we were talking right at the beginning in terms of this is these are meaningful investments in your organization and its impact. And we have to break out of this idea that it's not worthy of investment or that we're not worthy of investment, or that this is the way things have to be. I hear that a lot. We have inherited, as a sector, we've inherited this feeling that great things or good work comes with sacrifice, that we something has to give in order, like, for the better good. And usually that's us. And that actually does more harm to the work than good. And so we have to break out of this mentality. And it's hard. The way our brains are designed, we are creatures of habit. We learn things over time, and then it becomes like we're not aware that it governs how we behave. And so we have all these stories running through our brains around, what is our worthiness, what needs to happen in order to have an impact. And most of the time, it's actually not true. So we have to get out of that thinking, and we have to see that investments, whether it's in people or ourselves or our infrastructure and technology, like all of these things are required to grow. And that's just part of, like, if that's what we want for our organizations, we have to get used to paying for things.
and well, listen, you're using the key word here, investment. And when you do an investment, you expect a return. So, I mean, that's the way it is. I would tell you this: if you're, I agree with you. Sometimes it's really hard to make that decision
Mhm.
if it's a big amount of money, and if that's really a super concern when you go to speak to that fractional consultant, you need to say to you need to pay for yourself
Mhm. So
at the end of
yeah,
this 3 months, of the end of the 12 months, you need to, I need to hit this goal.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting because that comes up a lot in our conversations with organizations. And, like, yes, I only want to work with organizations where I know I can raise them at least their investment in what they're paying for me. But it is I'll give you a very specific example. Because with organizations and nonprofits, it's not just like bringing in money, right? It's where does that
Yeah.
money go and what is it for? So sometimes organizations are really well positioned to bring in undesignated funding if you're growing an individual giving program, or, sometimes major gifts. But one organization, we tripled their annual revenue in 1 year. But a lot of that was project specific because that's what they were working with. And so then the return on the investment is there, but it doesn't necessarily pay directly for the fundraising position, if that makes
Well,
sense.
I think that's a bad execution of the plan, because it should have been that they should have raised enough money for indirect costs, you
Yeah,
know?
and sometimes it's like, what do the funders allow you for overhead and stuff like that? It's very
Yeah, but
organizational
everyone is
specific. Yeah.
I hear this constantly, and everybody is afraid to
Oh,
ask
yeah.
for
Yeah.
internal, for
Yeah.
funds for. Everybody understands that.
More and
Everybody,
more foundations and major donors are starting to understand, but I agree, we have an obligation and responsibility to have these conversations,
yes.
and we are reinforcing this mindset that overhead is bad when we can't talk about it.
Well, everybody knows the stories of, like United Way and a lot of the big organizations where 90, I don't
Yeah.
know the exact statistic that 98% of the money goes to internal, but you got to educate. You got to
Yeah.
say this is important. I mean, people are afraid when it goes over 15%,
Yeah.
and it's just, listen, there's a lot of really good information out there. There's a lot of great conferences. You listen, the Nonprofit MBA podcast, it has over 450 episodes, and I could tell you every guest that I bring on is exceptional in teaching you how to run a great nonprofit. It's the information is all there.
Yeah. And that's why fractional executives, I think, are so helpful, is because most organizations, most small organizations, it's not the lack of information that's preventing them from growth, right? We actually know there's a ton of free information out there, and most of it, not all of it, but most of it is really high quality. I can list 10, 20 podcasts that I would recommend in a heartbeat,
Yep.
right? That's free and high quality and will teach you how to run your organization. It's not lack of information. Most of the time, it's lack of implementation. And that's why you need hands on deck, because you can't actually consume more information unless you get rid of some of your day to day work.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, what I've seen a lot in my life is when you do have people who really stay up to date and read a lot or listen to a lot of podcasts or go to a lot of conferences, sometimes you get many people who do it too much and they don't execute well. I'd rather those type of people read or listen to half the amount of
Yeah.
or a quarter of the amount of it and execute better. Listen, it's the exciting part of starting a nonprofit or being involved in a nonprofit is the idea, the un the less exciting part about is the actual execution, right?
Yeah.
And the execution to helping people is that is fun and exciting. The less sexy part is building the
It's the
internal part.
operations.
It's the
Yeah.
operations, right?
But that's actually the most important part to the sustainability of your impact.
Yeah, I agree. I think too is like stop. I think the executive director and maybe the board too, they have to stop thinking that their job is to not that 90% of their job is to get money to the people who need it, the cause who needs it. Your job, 90% of it, is to build a sustainable organization. That's your job. And unfortunately, I mean, there's a lot of executive directors out there who really miss the feeling that they get
Mhm.
from because they've done a good job of working on building
Yeah.
the internal parts, but you got to make that change, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And understand, and I think this is such a big part of it as well, is first of all, there's a whole rant I can make around how bad our sector is in investing in people. So, most executive directors who come from the front line, so to speak, or who are there because they are passionate about the work, they've never been trained on how to run the operations. And guess what? We don't like to do things we're not good at. It's human nature. And so the more we don't invest in our people to learn these things, the less it will get done. And at the same time, I think it's also very valid to say, like, not everyone is built to do all the work. And so figure out what lights you up and where you can add the most value to your organization, and then bring in people to do the other
Yeah,
parts.
I mean, you're right. You could bring in maybe you could bring in an
You can bring in an
operation
operations
person
person,
who's
you
got
can
the
bring in
experience
yeah, you
and
can
you
bring
go
in a
from there.
fractional operations
Yeah.
executive. Like
Yeah.
it does not have to be, you don't have to know. It's this catch 22 of like, we want you to know everything because you're irresponsible, but at the same time, it's not actually efficient for you to know everything and do all the things.
Yeah.
And how do you, and what that looks like at different phases of your growth will shift and change. So you need to know enough to be able to work with other people. But, and like right back to the beginning of this conversation is, if you're working with an executive level, like a fractional executive, you don't need to know as much as if you were hiring someone that you had to fully supervise and manage, because then you have to know it all.
Yeah, the problem is that when you start your nonprofit and it's growing, you can't start to specialize in what you like to do until you reach
Yeah,
a
you have
certain
to get,
revenue.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
really unfortunate, and maybe it's just part of the importance. Maybe that's required because maybe it's a good idea that you've learned a little bit about every part of your
Yeah,
nonprofit before you get to the 5 million, and then you can start bringing on an operations. But your goal should be, and I think everybody really wants this. Your goal should be, I want to get to this point because at that point I can start doing what it is that I
Mhm.
want to do. And
Yeah.
then and then you can start recognizing, oh, I'm really good at fundraising. Oh, I am really good at helping my constituents. Oh, I am really good at operations.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's that gets me excited every single day, because you're going to go through. The longer you're going to be in this role, the more and more you're going to change.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. Which you should. And that's going back to this idea of investment. Like all of this, your investments, I would say, as an organization, always reserve two buckets of resources as investments in your growth. One is financial, but the other is time. And you have
Oh,
to, as a leader, you have to make sure that at every phase of your growth, in the beginning, your time is going to be spent learning about finances, learning about operations at the right size for where you are right now. And as you learn about these things, you change. You become someone
yes.
different. You become a different leader,
Yep.
and you will learn what resources you need in the future. But there's as long as you keep investing, and again, not just financial, but financial is important, but your time. I hear from organizations all the time, I'm too busy to learn this. Well, you have, if we're not constantly learning, we're falling behind, right? So make sure that part of, like you said, every week on Fridays, you would review your strategic plan. I look at that as a time investment in your growth. Maybe it's not like traditional learning, but it is taking the time to get out of the day-to-day weeds and think strategically. So those two combined, I feel confident your organization can continue to fulfill its mission in new ways as you stay open to that
Yeah. Well,
learning.
luckily I love doing that too,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it was easy. Um, let's just spend the next couple of minutes talking about what you've seen that smaller nonprofits have acts like. What fractional consultants, what
Mhm.
expertise is out there that you should think about depending on what size you are. So like an example of what I'm looking at, you could say to me, okay, well, we've already talked about there's fundraising, right? There's
Mhm.
people who will
Yeah.
help you build your fundraising funnel, like
Yeah.
what you're doing, your events, there, and also fundraising can be broken down into a lot of different parts, right? It can
Yeah.
be events, it can be big donor,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
can be online campaigns, communication.
Yeah.
I mean, what am I missing here?
Yeah. So, okay, what I would say is if your organization is like under 500,000, you probably want generalists, right? You want a fundraising generalist who can do a little bit of all the things. But I have a whole list here of different functions that you can outsource through fractional executive. And again, these are positions that I would consider you have the hybrid of high level strategic with day to day implementation and looking at consistent implementation. So, fundraising, again, I would start with generalists, but you absolutely can outsource or can do this with legacy, giving, major gift, grant writing. The list
Yeah,
goes on
grant
and
writing. I
on.
forgot.
Yeah.
Yep. Hmm.
Evaluation and metrics, monitoring, program evaluation, human resources, finance, operations, marketing. And this is the last one is kind of like with a little asterisk, which is interim executive directors. So it's not the same in terms of long term, but oftentimes organizations going through change where they are without an executive director, an interim is a really good model to bridge that gap to help them find to have leadership in place until they and it's actually good to have a little bit of a clean slate before you bring in your next executive director. So that's a not the same model, but also something organizations can consider.
I'll share the story. I don't know if it relates the best, but so I'm on this board of this nonprofit. We help children who can not get Halloween costumes, we get them Halloween costumes. So
Oh.
think 90% of the kids are foster kids,
Mhm.
right? So everybody who thinks, and I'm sure this audience doesn't always think this way, but who can't afford a $15 or $80 costume, and it foster kids can't.
Yeah.
So, it's, and that's a little, for me to say that sounds a little, not about foster kids, but $15, right? But but it really happens quite a bit in the United States. And so that's what we do. We get these kids costumes. And so I came on the board about 2 years ago. And they had been around for about 8 years. They had never raised money before. And they all did it through used costumes and volunteers.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I tried to help them understand that we need to move to a fundraising campaign for a variety of reasons. They agreed, and they raised. So the first year we did it was last year, and we raised $10,000. And they're like, "Oh my god,
Yeah.
wow, we raised $10,000. It's so much money." Right. And I said to them, I go, that is nothing.
Yeah. Just
We,
it's the start.
it's,
Yeah.
you're all volunteering your time, and you're giving in, 30, 40 hours a week for, this is not sustainable.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to do this. And there was a variety of other things. And so they didn't know that $10,000 was not that much
Not a
money.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why, to the point, and like, if you're raising $10,000 a year, you're probably not ready to hire a fractional fundraiser, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Right.
But it's, I mean, I love that example because I think, a little unrelated to this conversation, but we think that people don't want to give. Most people approach fundraising and they think, well, I have to coerce someone, or I'm begging, or like, I have to convince them to do this thing because fundamentally they don't want to. And when I see organizations do these campaigns for the first time and raise $10,000 from nothing, it's just an indication that you're starting to scratch the surface, but that people care and they want to see your work happen. And when you don't invest in fundraising, you're letting them down. You're letting the foster
You
kids down. You're
I
letting the
know. I have
community
the
down.
complete opposite view, in that there's so much money out there.
Oh, yeah.
There is so much money, and people want to give it, and people aren't being asked.
Mhm.
They aren't being showed what you do. They want to give the money, and they're
Yeah.
not. And I'm speaking from personal experience.
Yeah.
I had a recent situation where I raised $15,000 for this organization, and this is well known, I know, in the industry, and they didn't thank me.
Wow.
They didn't, and I was the largest producer of
Yeah.
fundraising, and uh, you know, so why am I bringing this point up? In that I'm probably not going to raise the money for them again this
Yeah.
year, right?
And just to circle back, that's an operations problem. When you're not thanking your donors, when you're not stewarding
Yeah,
them, that is a failure in your operations
and
and
it's
your
well known to
fundraising
happen in
operations.
this industry,
Oh my God,
right? And
unbelievable.
by the way,
Yeah.
I want to be clear. They thanked me at the gala they had,
Mhm.
right? But after that,
Gone.
nothing. And I
Yeah.
guarantee you, they're going to come back to me in a month from now when they start doing the fundraising again, and say, "Hey, let's start raising money again."
Yeah.
And I'm going to be like, you know what? I don't know what I'm going to say yet,
Yeah. Yeah.
honestly. But my point being is that people want to raise
They wanna
money.
give.
They
They
want
wanna
to
raise
give.
money, they wanna give, but you are going to lose if you don't have the internal resources to manage these programs on a continual basis. There's
Yes.
no value in having a big fundraising campaign if you cannot do the work consistently throughout the year to make sure it happens again successfully.
And let's go back to something you said. So we do have to wrap this up. And that is, if you're a small organization and you kind of feel at that point, like this point, listen, we can't afford a fractional consultant. We're just not there yet. Right. Go find somebody who'll volunteer, who's got the who's got some expertise, and go to them and say, listen, it could even be someone who does it for a living and maybe is willing to do it as a volunteer, but ask them, say, listen, I know you're a fundraising expert, and do you think you could coach us up an hour or two a month for, just to help us for the first year? And then we can look at this, at paying it. I mean, if you ask enough people, they're going to say yes.
Mm-hmm. And fundraising is actually a very learnable skill.
Yes.
So you really just need someone who can show up consistently and, again, invest in the resources and the training to get people to where they need to be. I mean, I think fundraising is a very straightforward thing to learn if you find the right resources. So
it's also a core competency that if you don't have that, if you can't develop that, you don't have an organization, you don't have a nonprofit. Because let's face it, fundraising is the name of the game. It's all fundraising. The rest of it can be learned as you go, but the fundraising, that's, in fact, if I was to put all my time and money into the number one most important thing, it would be either finding somebody who can really help us with the fundraising aspect of our organization, or paying somebody for that.
Yeah. It's critical.
Cool. All right. Great. Now your best thing, just to close this out, is that you have access to, you know, all these people. Mm-hmm. You have access to all the people. You can listen to the executive director and they'll tell you their story, and you say, this is what you need.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm kind of like a matchmaker, so I can help organizations find the right person to work with. Yep,
I got you. And to be clear, I guess I would assume it's the consultant themselves who kind of pays you. Is that correct?
Yeah, the organizations don't pay me for that. I get paid in lots of other ways. And actually the consultants, sometimes they'll pay me for referrals, but sometimes not. Sometimes it's just a matchmaking, but they pay me for training and coaching and other services I provide. Yeah.
Good. All right. Well, it was a great podcast. I'd like to thank so very much Cindy Wagman from the Good Partnership for coming on today's podcast. And if you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend, and also subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. If you like today's podcast, please also give us a 5-star review or any of the other podcasts. It really helps us get the word out. And of course, if you're looking for a line of credit for your nonprofit, you can call us at 862-207-4118 or visit our website at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. Cindy, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
Thegoodpartnership.com is the best way.
Okay, great. Thegoodpartnership.com. I think Cindy is a good person for everybody to know, to be honest with you out there. So just to wrap it up, I want to remind everybody, as I always do, that as executive directors or as leaders of your organization, I know how much you care about your cause. However, if you don't take care of yourself, you are no good to your cause, your family, your friends. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And you need to think about yourself first every single day. That includes exercising, eating right, sleeping right. We all know the right things to do, but you have to understand that your energy level is key to the success of your organization. And you need to think of yourself first instead of the other people in your lives. I know it sounds maybe a little cold, but it's the reality of the situation. And I see it all the time, that people who are executive directors, they are such compassionate people. So please take good care of yourself. Other than that, everybody have a great day. Get out there. It's summertime right now as this podcast. Everybody get out and smell the roses a little bit and enjoy yourself. Have a great day, everybody.